Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you all had wonderful holidays. Today we are continuing with chapter 3, part 2 of the story of my marriage. Thank you so much to everybody that has been sharing my story. I see you. I really appreciate it. I think the worst part about this ordeal that I went through was the loneliness and isolation that I felt. You know, when you're going through something that is extremely traumatic like this, you don't have time to maintain your friendships or your relationships or to even be social. The few times that you actually manage to get out, when you do get out, it's like, more about trying to relieve pressure rather than trying to maintain friendships. So I felt extremely isolated and I felt like I was alone in this whole thing. So sharing and seeing your comments and hearing other people's thoughts and hearing what they've been through as well is really encouraging for me right now. It's actually extremely therapeutic, which is the reason why I wanted to share my story, just to get this off my chest so that I could move on into this new year feeling lighter, feeling like I could actually restart my life again and not let this continue to influence how I felt or what anybody thought of me, etc. But thank you again so much for sharing. I really appreciate it, and please continue to share. And for all the new subscribers, thank you so much. I'm truly overwhelmed with the response of this last video that I shared. But again, thank you, and please continue. This is great. So we are now going to get into part 2 of chapter 3 of the story of my life. So if you do not have a drink or anything like that, go and grab it, and I will see you in a minute. The pandemic was actually absolutely amazing for me. I did nothing. For the first couple of days, I just slept and ate and played with my daughter and spent time with my sister and just did absolutely nothing but just rejuvenate myself. The State Department had managed to find me a pro bono lawyer who would represent me for the Hague petition. So I met her and we immediately started working on my case, on building it, because we had to file it before a year was up since my son had been taken. And this was like April. So we worked hard on that, and at the same time she also contacted my ex's attorney and told him that he obviously had to allow me to speak to my son more often, which he did then only. And I spoke to him as often as I could. So I ate, slept, and rejuvenated myself, and I started kind of feeling creative again, getting ideas and stuff like that. And one of the ideas that I got was to create an app. My ex had started contacting me directly, and during one of those conversations, he agreed to return some of my belongings that were still at the space. And I really wanted my books back because it was a large collection and it had taken me like so long to collect those books. They were really important to me and nobody there cared about them anyway. So I got my books, some kitchen equipment, and some of my couches and things like that. So those were delivered to the house that I was living in Hoggetty around August. Then the following month in September, I kind of thought that now, I had stopped, this whole house fight was already kind of over. And I thought that they were going to leave me alone now and let me just do my thing, because at the end of August, beginning of September, I launched my company. I launched this app that I had been building during the pandemic. It was an app where you could order food, you could order a physical book, and you could order drinks. And you could also get chauffeur services. I still had cars, and I could cook, and I had this library of books, and my brother had a liquor store just down the road from me. So with all those things, I would be able to provide people with all these things which they couldn't access because of the pandemic. Restaurants were still not allowed to open yet. So we launched this, it started operating, but 2 weeks into operation, we had a website, it was hacked, and that went down. And I kind of knew, obviously, this was related to these guys because my ex wrote to me, like, kind of like, oh, so you've started this, blah, 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 you know. And I was just like, okay, whatever. So we just operated using the app only because at least that was much more secure. In September, one morning, mid-September, CID drugs showed up again at my gate. This time, they had a summons. Someone had decided that our case was worth prosecuting. My sister and I now suddenly had to be tried. We had to have a hearing, and this whole matter had to go to court. It was devastating. I had hoped that even though I knew that it was something that had been hanging over my head for a long time, I had hoped that they would never try to use it. It would never come up again. But here it was. Apparently, someone had decided that it was worth going to trial or had pushed for it to go to trial. So my father asked his lawyer to represent us in that criminal case and to take the rest of my cases to help me organize them and to kind of start getting rid of like some of the stuff that was going on. So in September and October, we worked on this case. We had to go to court, the magistrate criminal court, every other week. They kept postponing because first the state wasn't ready. Just all of the usual delays at the magistrate's court. So this stretched all the way from September up until December. In the meantime, in September, I had decided that I wanted to start, I was thinking to myself, you know what, if I'm going to stay in Zimbabwe, I need to start, making some steps towards independence. I need to set up my business properly. I need to find premises and, I need to start trying to move forward with my life. So I decided to sell one of the vehicles that I had, which was a Sprinter. I had 4 vehicles left at that time. So the most valuable one was a Sprinter. And I decided to sell that one because I had the least use for it at the time. So I put it at a car sales that belonged to a friend, and he started showing it to a couple of people. And very shortly after that, maybe 2 weeks, there were some people that showed interest, and he told me about it, that they would come the next day and do a drive test. So I was like, oh, great. So they came. And, when you go for a test drive with a car, you always go with a representative from the car sales. So it was this guy who came. The guy from the car sales started the van for him, and then he started driving. And then sort of halfway through this drive test, this guy took a turn that he was not supposed to, into a quiet road. And this guy was actually, no, that's the wrong place. We're supposed to turn further down. This guy completely ignored him. A few meters further, he stopped, and then a big guy, a bouncer, opened the door and got into the van, and he had a gun. He hit this guy over the head with the gun, and he threw him out of the van. And whilst he was doing that, he was busy shouting, oh, this is my ex's vehicle. It's not mine. saying my name. So this guy was like thrown out, injured, of course, but then he was conscious. So he called his boss and immediately told him what happened. His boss came and picked him up, and they went straight to Avondale police, because this car sales was in Avondale, and reported what happened. The police like acted pretty fast, and notified, I guess, all their like roadblocks, whatever, like the number plate, etc., for this van. And then I was called around 2 o'clock in the afternoon and told that this had just happened. So I went straight to Avondale police, because they asked me for my registration book and all of the information, like, just to confirm that I was the owner, etc. So I brought all of that stuff to Avondale. And then I went home, feeling pretty dismal, because I was just like, and then I heard, obviously, that this is what this guy had heard, that this bouncer had shouted this to him. And then I just knew, okay, so I guess he's trying to take this van. So, I told the officer that, yes, I know who he's talking about. It's my ex. He has been trying to take away as much as he can from me. So now I guess he's trying to take this van. So I went home feeling pretty dismal, because, I felt pretty crushed, because this was supposed to be the beginning of something, yet again, me trying to, get past all of the stuff that had happened in the past and just move on with my life and continue to rebuild. And it did not take long. At around 8 p.m. on that same day, I got a call from the police. They had found the van. Apparently, when they had left, okay, so this van had a very specialized driving system. It's not like normal key ignition. It's got like a very different starting system. It doesn't even use a key. So you would have to know it to be able to start it. And then on top of all that, you can drive it without a battery. So what they would do is they would put a battery in to start the car, and then they would take the battery out, and then they would take it on the test drive and drive it back without switching it off back to the car sales. So obviously these guys didn't know all of this information. So when they took the van, they drove it to a place in Marlborough, obviously switched it off, and then couldn't figure out how to switch it back on. And obviously it wouldn't go on because there's no battery, and then trying to figure out the ignition or starting system was complicated. So they just ditched the van and they disappeared. And then the owner of this property where they had just dumped it came and saw this van and called the police. So it was recovered that same day. I went, I identified it, and then a policeman slept there. The next day it was taken. I drove it to Southerton. It was cleared and I was given the van back. I was so happy. I was just like, oh my God, thank goodness, So October, November, we worked on this case, this criminal case, going to court every other day. I tried to continue doing my work as well, and at the same time trying to build my case in the US, but then it was now sort of a little bit on hold because of this criminal case in Zimbabwe. The worst thing about all of this, the thing that really crushed me, the thing that was like the sentence for this possession charge was between 5 to 15 years in prison. And I wasn't able to properly, like my lawyer here in the US wasn't able to properly work on my case, because she needed to know what the outcome would be. Because if, for instance, I was found guilty, I would be sent away for a number of years and nothing would come of my Hague petition or anything. So it would be useless for her to continue. So we kind of, continued to work a little bit in the hopes that, I would not be prosecuted and I would be able to continue with my case. And in November, after both sides were heard, the magistrate gave us a date for the ruling. December 24th, Christmas Eve of 2020. Prior to that day coming, she told us she gave us a case to go and read up on. She gave my lawyer a case to go and read up on. And it was a case that involved a girl who was in a similar situation to mine. And somehow there was Mambo Sasa in the picture. He had been the lawyer for her partner, and she was the accused. I just felt like it was almost like an omen. I felt like she was trying to pass on a message. Because another thing that I forgot to point out was, like, throughout this time when we were going to court, one of the guys from Mambasasa's office, who I actually knew, was always in court. He was always sitting, like, talking to the prosecutor, etc. And for me, it just seemed like obviously they were working together, you know, sharing information, etc. Obviously trying to get me put away. I have never felt so like, you know, it's normal. You know, you wake up every single day and you take your freedom, your ability to just get out of your house and continue to live your life for granted, as you should, because your freedom is, you know, it should not depend on how somebody feels about you. No one should be allowed to just take away your freedom just like that for no cause. I've never felt more like my freedom was at risk. I have never felt more trapped. Out of everything that has happened to me, like, I think in all of my life, even to date, that was the weakest that I felt leading up to that 24th of December. I felt powerless. I felt powerless to change my destiny, and I knew that my whole life depended on this woman and depended on her ability to value my life more than money. The morning of the 24th, I packed a bag for my daughter, and I packed a pair of sneakers for myself and a hat. You know, from my previous experience at ch3.pt2, I already knew what I needed to have, what would be important. So I packed just those things because I knew that if it was a guilty verdict, I wouldn't be coming back to pack a bag. There would be nothing, like I would not be seeing any of those things again. So I packed, we got into the car with my sister and went. You know, my driver that drove me there was actually like, oh no, you know what, you're gonna come back, everything is gonna be fine. But then, you know, inside, like deep inside, I knew the risk, I knew the potential of what could happen to me. I knew like how much these people wanted to get rid of me, and I knew that, like, you know, it wasn't quite as black and white as all of that. So we got to the court, went inside. We were basically the only people there. I mean, it was Christmas Eve, so there was basically no one else there. And when the magistrate started reading, I couldn't tell. Like, I was so tense, I could not tell. I was just standing there, like just praying for mercy, just praying. And then she carried on talking. I saw my lawyer looking at me and he was smiling, and like, you know, you almost can't hear because you're so traumatized, like you're waiting for, like, you know, something bad. And then I started listening, and she was like, you know, saying that she didn't, like, you know, she was reading that she didn't believe that the state had proved their case. She believed me, that someone had set me up, that someone stood to gain from my incarceration. And I just started crying. I was just like, I just started weeping. It was just like, I have never felt more, you know, when you feel like you want to thank someone, like, thank you so much for giving me my life back. Thank you so much for actually seeing me as a human being and not as just another opportunity to make a little bit of money. I have never been so grateful to anybody in my life that she did not prosecute me when she could have. I will link the ruling down below. But yeah, we went home feeling so thankful. The next day on Christmas, we had made no plans, of course, because I thought I was going to be in prison. But I got, like, you know, a lot of calls and orders for food and things like that. And also it was like published in the paper that I had been acquitted. So like a lot of people were calling me to congratulate me, you know, people that I didn't even know were following what was happening. So I cooked and I did deliveries myself. I didn't even call in anyone to help me. I just felt so free. I just felt so energized. Like for the first time in a long time, you know, when you feel like you've been given like a new lease on life. This was like, my life felt like it had started again. So I worked, I was happy, and New Year's passed, January, February came. I finally found a premises where I could open a little restaurant. During the pandemic, like when I had created this app, one of the things I had done was created 3 different menus. One of the menus was called the Posh Burger. So this is the concept that I wanted to adapt into a proper little kind of like trailer burger bar. It was a gourmet burger brand. We had 15 different types of burgers, like vegan, fish, etc. It was actually very cool, all handmade. So I found a premises in Chizzy at a place called The Hub. And this place, like, it was just, the irony of it all was not lost on me. I was just like, oh goodness. The place was directly opposite where Alex Mambusasa's office was. And unfortunately, it was such a good premises, like the location so perfect, and they didn't have another restaurant there. It was just not even an option for me to pass it over. And you know, I kind of knew as well that it didn't matter how close or far away I was from him, I would always be like within his radar. So I went ahead. It was like a great lease as well. Like the conditions were perfect for me, and I started building. I built a little container, and we put our couches and everything in the garden. It was very pretty, and started working. And then, like, you know, but by then, every other day when I would go to Chizzy Shopping Center, I would see my car in the parking lot. I never actually encountered him. I would just see my car and know that he was around. And I knew obviously that it didn't take him very long to figure out that I was now across the street from him. A couple of months later, I moved to Belgravia. I intended to open a second restaurant at the Belgravia property, but then that just didn't end up being a great location, so I just continued to stay there. In June, the judge in the US finally gave us a court date for the hearing for the Hague petition that I had filed to get my son back. And he said it would be on August the 3rd. It was an in-person hearing, which meant that I had to travel to the United States to attend in person. I was, you know, I was pretty like gutted because, like, number one, I didn't know how I was even going to manage something like that, like the etiquettes, the accommodation, like all the logistics and everything that would come with such a trip. But throughout this entire situation that I have been through, I feel like the universe has sent me some guardian angels, people that have protected me, provided for me, and taken care of me as if I was like, I don't know, like their relative, or like as if like to the extent with which I never understood and which I don't understand, but which gave me hope and gave me the strength to continue. So my lawyer in the US, I told her, like after he told us that, I was like, wow, that is like 1.5 months away. My daughter doesn't even have a passport. Even if I come with her, how am I going to attend court when I don't have someone to leave her with? I can't take her with me. And even if I come with someone to help me, like my sister doesn't even, like her passport's expired. There's just like so many like roadblocks and impossibilities in the way. And she was like to me, you know what, Priscilla, we'll figure something out. Because she had been there with me for more than 1.5 years now, and she had witnessed every single thing that had happened to me in Zimbabwe. She was privy to absolutely everything, because obviously she had to know what was going on. So she told me point blank that there was nothing that she would ever be able to do for me as long as I was in Zimbabwe. She would only be able to protect me in any way once I got to the US. And she was going to do everything in her power to help me to get there. She went and she found donors. First, she found a fund that sent me money for the passports. And then after that, she found a donor who bought all of our air tickets. I couldn't even believe it. And, you know, after the judge told us this court date, I knew my ex was never ever going to let me come. I knew that it wasn't going to take long before something happened to me, or before they tried to do something to me. And I just waited. I didn't know what it was going to be. 2 weeks after the judge gave us this date, like around the beginning of July, I was at work at Chizzy at the burger bar. I suddenly saw this group of men coming towards my little trailer. And in front, I recognized the man who was coming. He was from the messenger of court. I knew him because he had been the one that had like been serving countless things to me when I had been at the Ballantyne property, at the space. So I saw him coming. I just stood there by the window and I watched, and I just knew. I was like, okay, it's started. It's begun, whatever it is. So he came, he handed me these documents. The first one was an order to attach my Sprinter. Next page was an order from the magistrate's court, which said that my ex had not paid. Remember the false eviction that he had used to have me evicted, or have himself and then me ultimately evicted from our property. Apparently, this eviction had happened because he had not paid rent. So now this rent that had been unpaid, the company that owned the property, my company, had now gone to the magistrate's court and filed for his property to be attached. And the Sprinter, which was in my company's name, suddenly belonged to him. There was actually a registration book with his name. So they had come, they were going to attach it. You know, I said to the guy, like, this is my car. I've got a registration book with, you know, all of the documents. And also he's tried to take this vehicle a couple of times. Everybody knows that it's mine. Then he was like, oh, if you have any complaints, you have to go to the magistrate's court and file whatever it's called to stop it from being auctioned, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, okay, fine. You know, it's like I had expected something to happen, but for me, this was better than what I had expected. Like I had expected them to actually try to physically attack me or something like that. But for me, this was like something that was far better, just trying to take away things, because I knew that obviously his justification to himself was like, you know, trying to stop me from having anything to sell so that I wouldn't be able to afford to go on the trip. So I was like, okay, fine. I actually drove the van to the magistrate's office because no one knew how to drive it. I drove it there, got there, made a fuss, you know, as usual, like, you know, trying to like stick up for myself because I didn't want them. You know, I realized that because my lawyer and I were planning all of these things and she had found all of these donors and funds, etc., without like anybody knowing, I didn't want to give the impression that I had an alternative source of funding. I wanted to like keep making it seem as though these things, like my little restaurant and this last car that I had left, were the only things that I had. And so if those things were taken away, that would be it. I would not be able to go anywhere. So I, you know, put up a fuss, and I guess it worked because 2 weeks after that, then I knew, like, you know, I knew obviously they were going to come after the restaurant. Like that was obvious because, you know, they obviously didn't want me to have even like $1, no single source of income or anything like that. So I knew that was going to happen. And it didn't even take long, like maybe a week after that, Highlands police came and they were like, oh, because we were serving shisha. First they were like, oh, liquor licenses, etc. I was like, no, we don't sell liquor, etc. But thank God I wasn't there actually when they came, because I knew at that point that it was very dangerous for me to be near the restaurant. I knew that was the next thing that they were going to attack. They would attack any place where I could get money from. So I didn't go. My brother is the one who would go. We had another girl who was there who was cooking. So they would go, they would manage the place. It was tiny. It was like just a trailer. So they would go, they would manage the place on their own. And so the police started coming, looking for something every single day. And like, you know, my brother was like to me, Priscilla, do not even go there because yeah, you can tell that they're looking for you. Like I knew that the second I would go there, they would find a reason to arrest me, and that would be it. I would probably be put in jail until after the hearing. I would have missed everything, and you know, nothing would come off my petition. So I didn't go there. All I did was I went to town, carried on putting up a fuss. I went to Commercial Crimes Division about this van. I went to CVR, like, you know, to like get the documents that had been used to change the ownership, etc. So I kind of like made a big fuss about that. But in the meantime, my sister was sorting out her passport. My daughter's passport was busy being sorted out. I luckily had met a man from the president's office through the woman that I stayed with in Russia who worked at the Russian embassy. She gave me his contacts and told me that if I needed help with anything in Zimbabwe, he would be the person to speak to. So when we needed passports, I contacted him, and because of the urgency, I had all the documents to show the need for urgency. He helped me get to the right people and to get all of the passports sorted out. So I thankfully didn't have to, in the open, go to the passport office, which would be like so obvious. I tried not to be seen anywhere where it would make it seem like I was making any kind of preparations. I didn't even use my phone to make any kind of arrangements because I just did not even, like even my email. I used my sister's phone and her email like to communicate with my lawyer as well, because she actually even told me, you know what, rather do that, contact me using someone else's phone so that we can pass messages or whatever, but do not talk about anything on your phone. Don't talk about anything with anybody. And I didn't. The State Department called the American Embassy because they were also not fully functional at the time. They were only doing emergency visas. So they asked them to give us an appointment. On the 26th of July, we went to the embassy. We did our interviews. Like, we actually literally just pretended we were going for a walk, walked down 2 blocks, and then took a taxi from 2nd Street Extension, went to the American Embassy, did our interviews, and then came back. Quietly, I told no one. Tell my maid, I didn't tell anybody because, like, they had tried so many times to get to me through her, and you never know what people share. So we went for this interview, and the guy was obviously prepared because he was like, okay, when are you flying? We told him Thursday, and then he was like, fine, come on Wednesday, pick up your passports. That was like Wednesday, the 28th. On the Wednesday, I went to town to continue my tirade about this car, and my sister went and picked up our passports and brought them back home. The next day, she had contacted our cousin who came and picked us up. The three of us, early in the morning, came, picked us up, drove straight to the airport. Our flight was at like around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But back then you had to be at the airport about 4 hours early because there was like this complicated going through sprays and stuff like that. I was actually scared when we got to the airport that one of my ex's friends that worked at the airport would see me, because he had all these guys there that would help him like fast track to, like, when he arrived from places, he wouldn't have to go through the usual lines and stuff. They would just fast track him through. I was so scared that those people would see me. I was wearing a hoodie and stuff. We checked in, thankfully, and once we crossed immigration, like, I couldn't, like, I crossed immigration and I was just like, oh my God, like, I felt like a sense of like, that sense of like, I'm almost done, I'm almost there, but still not yet. We waited at our boarding gate, and then finally, when we were able to board, we boarded. When we were taxiing, that's when we called my dad and we told him that we had made it. We were on our flight. We were about to take off. Called my lawyer, told her that we were about to leave. And then she was like, okay, she still wouldn't say anything. She would keep quiet for another 24 hours until we were well clear of Africa. Then she would email my ex's lawyer and tell him that I wanted to see my son. And that was it. We were on our way to the US. Finally.